Kia ora koutou everyone, to our speakers who have taken the time to join us tonight, and also to everyone who's joining us online, welcome. I'm going to start tonight by just getting to know our speakers a little bit. So I'd like you just to take turns telling us about your journey. How did you get to this place that you've ended up, and what has your journey looked like? Should we start with you, Jane?
Kia ora, Sarah, and good evening, everyone. It's always difficult to look back and think, how did you end up here? Because everybody I've ever spoken to about this says, well, it sort of happened by accident. It wasn't quite the way I planned it because I didn't ever plan it. But for me, I trained in medicine and then in pediatrics because I really like children and particularly focused on small babies, newborn babies, neonatology. And it's very, very special to look after small babies, but it's even more special to be able to do research that makes a difference to potentially hundreds or thousands or even millions of babies, as opposed to the individual baby in front of you, much as that is wonderful and important. And my initial interest was particularly in growth, what makes babies grow, why do some grow better than others? And of course, growth is related to lots of outcomes, including brain growth and brain outcomes in newborn babies. So over the years, I've got involved in many different aspects of newborn babies, but currently one of the things we're looking at is what is it about moderate and late preterm babies, so the group of babies who are most commonly just a few weeks preterm, and what is it about them that makes them at risk of long-term problems, and what's different about their brains, and what can we do about that? So maybe I'll stop there and let the others talk.
So one of the things I was going to do before the seminar started was just to make sure I'd got all your names right. So please correct me if I get your name wrong. I'm going to hand over to you. Is it Nika?
Yeah, that's perfect. Thank you. So, well, I agree with what Jane said. I'd love to say that I came to be a researcher after careful planning, but that's not the case. It feels like I just followed my interest and grabbed opportunities as they came along. I originally trained to become a translator and interpreter in French and Portuguese, but then I got interested in how people learn and decided to focus my next learning project on that. So I did a bachelor and master in learning how people learn and family psychology, sort of combination. And I got really interested in parenting, how to help young families raise their children in a positive way. And that has been very rewarding as a more of a practitioner role, as a parenting facilitator. But then I got the opportunity to do research in this area, and that's how I became involved in research. And now I'm working at Liggins Institute, which is an entirely different environment. And it's been great to have this opportunity to use my skills in more of a medical setting. I'll leave it at that.
And how about you, Sian?
Hi. Well, yeah, I think I echo what Jane and Nico have just said. I started off just following what I thought I enjoyed, because I always think that you're going to do well at something you enjoy. So I started off as doing an undergraduate degree in human movement science. So I actually kept just having fun with that and joined all the very active and sporty people that didn't know what they were doing, and then ended up realizing that actually this is actually really interesting, and became particularly interested in disability and in neuromuscular biomechanics, and how sort of that interaction between the brain and the movement. And so that sort of led me down this pathway of being really interested in cerebral palsy in particular, and looking at how we can measure movement using biomechanical methods. and then also how we can provide rehabilitation to be able to help their movement. And of course, this is always their movement outcomes are connected to their brain and the alterations or the disturbances that have happened at a very young age. So I started working out in my early career, looking in cerebral palsy at the sort of early childhood, more sort of 5 to 12-year-olds, and then accidentally sort of got to younger and younger, and ended up in a weird, long story roundabout ways that ended up still looking at movement, in people and related to cerebral palsy, but instead of looking at the whole body movement outcomes in relation to walking and running and jumping, was actually looking at movement in a different way in terms of the general movements assessment, in being able to actually diagnose young babies or detect them that they might be at a risk of having cerebral palsy at a very early age of around 3 months of age. And that's sort of brought me to work where I am now, working at the Liggins Institute, which I still just kind of laugh to myself at what is someone with a human movement science background who almost, sometimes it's funny thinking that you're working with in disability in itself, but now I'm working with babies. But it really does come about in that it all kind of comes together when you're saying I've always been interested in cerebral palsy, I've always been interested in working with kids and movement, and somehow all of these have collided in this magical way to make it that I enjoy going to work every day and enjoy what I do. So that's the very abbreviated attempt at trying to tell my story.
It's so great to hear that you've all followed your interests, and your interests have led you into a job where you really feel like it's something where you're making a difference and you're really interested in it. And that's a really interesting thing, I think, for people to hear. And I'd also like them to know what it's like a day in the life of you. How much time are you in a lab or working directly with babies? Do you all do similar things, or are you all working on quite different projects at the moment? And how many things have you got on the go? So I hope that's not too many questions, but I might go back the other way and start with you, Sian, if you want to tell us a little bit about what you do day to day.
Okay, that's quite hard. I think that's another really exciting thing about what we do, is that no day is really the same. Unless you're in lockdown, then it does feel a bit more the same. But you really are, when you're particularly at this stage of your career, when you are still doing some data collection, you are doing grant writing, you are attempting manuscript writing or data entry, or meeting with students and planning new projects, or teaching new minds with how to do research, or trying to convince them to go down a particular pathway. So it's really hard to pinpoint what you do on a day-to-day basis. I have a lot of projects that I'm fortunately involved in. One in particular, which I'm sure Jane will talk about as well, is the moped study, which I'll leave for her to have to talk to that one. But I am fortunate to be able to be involved in a few other projects. One is looking at early muscle growth and motor development in babies who might be at risk of cerebral palsy. And another completely different project is looking at an intervention for participation for children with cerebral palsy. So very different projects that I have on the go. There's just a quick example, but yeah, I'll hand over to someone else.
Thanks, Sian. How about you, Nikki?
We do work together on some projects, like with the moped study that I'm sure Jane will talk to us about. Part of my research that I do is engaging with research participants. So what outcomes they are interested in finding out more about, and trying to understand what it's like for them to be part of a medical trial. So, for example, I'm looking into, I've been having discussions with young adults who have been part of a medical trial since before they were born. So when their mum was pregnant, they took part in a trial to see the effects of corticosteroids on babies' lungs. So these children have been part of this medical trial for 20 years now, and their parents have consented on their behalf. So I've been trying to find out how they feel about that, their parents consenting on because part of that trial was also giving blood to test for various, for example, for diabetes, for other blood works. So how I am trying to find out what it was like for them to be part of such a trial and how they feel about their parents consenting on their behalf. And overall, it seems that they're actually fine with that because parents make all the important decisions in their lives. So it makes sense that they also make that kind of decision. So that's an example of what I do.
That's really fantastic to hear that you're actually going back to the clinical trial participants and talking to them about what outcomes they want to see. And that must be really fascinating to follow people for 20 years.
It's very fascinating, yeah, absolutely. It's a very privileged position to be in, I find.
So how about you, Jane? Are you mainly running projects now, or do you still get to deal directly with patients?
Yes, like the others, I feel in a really privileged position. You'll hear that word a lot from us. We really do feel very privileged because, you know, no 2 days are the same, and there's a huge amount of variety, but also novelty. You know, something new happens almost every day, which is very exciting. That's not to say we find some exciting new result every day. Research doesn't quite work that way. We're very lucky if we get a new result every few months, but there's always something new happening. I spend a lot of time with students. So teaching, reviewing their work, discussing what we're going to do next and so on. There's inevitably quite a lot of simply making things run, writing ethics applications and grant applications and reports for grants and writing up the manuscripts for papers results and getting them published and so on. There's a limited amount of direct contact with families for me, but certainly talking to them about results of studies, talking to them about findings of scans. We've got a study going at the moment. We're doing MRI scans on brains of babies, and obviously parents need to know the results of those and what they mean. So talking to them about that. And also a lot of liaising with all of the different skills and disciplines that you need to make a research study really work. And I think Nika and Sian have just illustrated that. I mentioned a study of moderate and late preterm babies, so babies just a few weeks preterm. The one we're currently doing is called MOPED. So Sian's interested in babies' movements and what early assessment of movements might have to do with predicting outcomes in these babies. Nika's involved in talking to the families about what they would like in the way of information and follow-up and what kind of advice they really need, because they currently don't get a lot. I'm more involved in the MRI component and keeping an overview, but just gives you an idea of how very varied the skills that are needed. And we need the clever MRI people, and we need the clever nurses who actually look after the babies in the scanner and so on. So it's very multidisciplinary, lots of different people involved, a lot of keeping it all together and coordination for me.
One of the things we've noticed is that neuroscience is quite dominated by women. Do you agree with that statement, Jane? Is that what you've found over the years?
I think all health sciences are actually dominated by women. It's not just neurological sciences, but all health sciences have a predominant preponderance of women in them. One could argue about all sorts of reasons for that, but it is a fact that there's a large proportion.
Have you come across any significant reasons that you think women are attracted into the health sciences?
Well, I think women are often attracted into the caring professions as a whole. I think also they're attracted to areas, and these are gross generalizations, of course, and I hate gross generalizations, but attracted to where making a difference to people is important to them. But there's just enormous scope in the health sciences as well. And a great deal of flexibility for families and for people who have many other commitments. There's a huge flexibility in the workforce.
That's, I guess, a really important aspect for women to, obviously, they're often juggling more things than just a job. I might put this next question to you, Nika. What do you think about the flexibility of the career and working in the space you do as a woman? Do you find it's a good career for a woman to be a part of?
Absolutely. Yeah, I think it's really easy, not easy, I wouldn't say easy, but it's doable to combine it with having a family. I mean, during my bachelor and master studies, which I did at night, I had my 3 children and I raised them throughout my studies, including my PhD. And now that they're a little bit older, I do have more flexibility in terms of them being more mature and being able to take care of themselves a bit further, a bit more. But it's great that as a researcher, I find, especially at the University of Auckland, I've never been employed at a different university, so I can't say anything about other universities, but I do have the flexibility to start early, for example, and be home by 3, or yeah, I think it's really doable. Plus there are childcare, good quality childcare facilities at the university, so that might be helpful as well as a parent to be able to work and study.
And Sian, if you were thinking about someone who is maybe still at high school and thinking about getting into the health sciences or neuroscience, what kind of pathways can you take?
Well, there's so many ways of entering into this area. And I think if you're really looking at leaving high school and going into university, I think just keep your doors open, and also just remember that there are many different pathways into what if your dream, journey where you want to go. Don't think that those end of school exams are the be all and end all, because you can start off with a degree in human movement science or psychology or linguistics and still end up in where you never thought you would want to go. So a lot of people, especially now, do I like to think of it like you're kind of creating your burger. Sometimes you get your meat patty might be, sorry for those vegetarians, let's make it a soybean patty, and that might be your main part of your burger, but you're actually always going to be adding on bits and pieces to make it that delicious meal at the end of your career. So I don't feel pressured into thinking you're going to make the wrong decision, because along the way you're always going to be collecting new skills and along the way to end up where you want to be. But as long as you surround yourself with good people and keep your options open, I think, yeah, and choose what you enjoy, then you're going to succeed no matter what you end up doing.
Jane, have you found that neuroscience has been a good career to sort of change direction and choose different directions when you find something that you're really interested in?
Yeah, I don't have the sense of changing direction. I think the directions change me very often. The others have mentioned, following your interests, doing something that's really interesting. And if you're doing what you're really interested in, what you really love doing, it will take you in unexpected places and you will take unexpected turns. And as long as you're open to taking those opportunities when they come up, then you will end up not quite where you thought you were going, but that's okay. Somebody asked me a few years ago to give a lecture on how to plan a research career. And I was a bit alarmed about that because I had no idea how to talk about how to plan a research career, because I'd never actually planned a research career. It's just what happens along the way. So I talked to quite a number of my colleagues, people I had a lot of respect for and thought were fantastic researchers. And I said, I have to give this lecture. What would you say? Give me some tips. They all just laughed at me. every single one of them just laughed at me and said, I didn't plan a research career, I have no idea. So I think don't be put off by making a plan. Focus on what's interesting and keeping your options open and grabbing the opportunities as you go along.
So would you say your research or your career has more been directed by interesting findings that you've pursued? You haven't necessarily been able to predict them, but things come up and you end up pursuing them?
Absolutely. Interesting findings and interesting opportunities. People you meet who have a different slant on things, who just drop an idea, drop a comment that makes you think, gosh, I hadn't thought of that. Maybe we should think about it in a different way. So there's lots of keeping your mind open to the possibilities and the options as you go along.
Can you think over your career of a couple or a few highlights, some really exciting things about your research that have been really memorable?
Well, there are always new exciting things. It's hard to pin down highlights. The highlights to me have always been the people, particularly the students. Seeing colleagues and students do well, discovering new things, moving on in their careers, has always really been the most exciting thing for me.
Nika, I'm going to put this next question to you. What are some of the challenges in the field?
That's a difficult question. Some of the challenges. I'm not really sure. I think the greatest challenge, perhaps for young or early career researchers, I should say, is securing funding and finding the next project and making sure that you can continue with upskilling yourself and making a positive contribution. Yeah, I'm not really sure what else.
Yeah, that is definitely a challenge in the field. At the foundation, we make a real point of trying to fund as much early career research as we can, just to help people get established before they necessarily get a permanent position. So yeah, it is a really challenging time, and it's great to follow people's careers and see them progress. Sian, are you a research fellow, or do you have teaching or clinical appointments as well?
I am a senior research fellow at the moment, and so I'm very fortunate to be able to have that full-time focus on research, but I have had a teaching and research. Again, I was fortunate to have that position previously, and that is also has its own challenges in itself, but having the opportunity to be able to completely focus on your research, it's just amazing. And again, I'm always kind of thinking, oh, is someone going to work out that they're paying me to do this? Is someone going to suddenly give me a phone call and say, hey, actually, you're having, yeah, what we shouldn't be getting paid for this. You're doing it because it was something that you enjoyed to do. So I think I just wanted to jump on your previous question as well about the challenges, especially for females, it's imposter syndrome. Once someone told me about that term, I was like, that's what that is. And how do I get rid of it? And I don't think you necessarily do, but I heard that a lot of females in particular have imposter syndrome and have this constant feeling of that I shouldn't be here. So that's a challenge of sort of faking this confidence to be able to, and push through and do what you're meant to be doing, but having that sort of self-belief in yourself, and putting yourself forwards as well, because sometimes you think, what would a male do in this scenario? Would they say yes? Would they say no? Because sometimes it's just as important to say no than it is to say yes to things. So occasionally, that's where you have to, many days you have to sort of face that imposter syndrome coming back at you. So that's something that maybe some others on the panel have also experienced, or maybe not. Maybe it's just me.
I see Nika nodding.
Oh, absolutely, me too. And I hear it a lot also in my students. And they ask, will it ever pass? And I say, well, it hasn't passed with me yet, but it might at some point. Yeah, I agree.
Jane, does it pass?
Not completely, no. But you learn to live with it.
When I think of challenges, I really think of the last couple of years, because I know, Jane, you mentioned a lot about it's the people you meet, and a lot of that is conferences and traveling to other labs or hospitals around the world. And also the fact that you deal with people, and it's been very difficult to have patient-centered research during COVID. So do you want to talk a little bit about the challenges of the last couple of years?
Yes, it has been difficult. We, as you say, patient-centered research has been very difficult and completely impossible for periods, which is always disappointing, partly because it simply interrupts all your work, but also a lot of things are time limited. Funding is usually time limited. People's appointments are time limited very often, so that when the time's ticking away, it adds huge stress to everybody. We've been lucky to be able to do a lot of things by Zoom and online. You know, you can do a lot of writing and talking and sharing information and so on and teaching, but you can't do the person interaction thing that is so important. And yes, there've been online conferences, virtual conferences, but they're just not the same experience. And of course, only part of the reason for going to a conference is to hear the information that's presented. A lot of it is about networking with the people who are there. It's the coffee queue conversations. It's the people you run into by accident, or the people you say, gosh, is that who that is? I need to talk to them. And it's that stuff that you can't do online. So I think it's been very difficult and very stressful for everybody, all sorts of different professions and careers for all sorts of different reasons, but including ours for many reasons over the last couple of years. And we're, you know, it'll take another couple of years for people to emerge from that.
I know one of the things that people often tell us is that they get into a career because they have a family member or someone that they know that's experienced that neurological condition. Has that been the case for any of you? Has an interest been sparked because of a personal connection?
Not for me, but I do hear that a lot. And we certainly, a lot of people contribute to the research or to the funding because of that specific link and interest.
No, for me neither, but I did study Portuguese because I wanted to learn the language. So it's, for me, it's personal interest. And then I was pregnant with my first child, and I became interested in parenting and how people learn. So I think I was guided more by my own moments, by my own life, rather than by someone else. Yeah.
Do you have anything to add to that, Sian, or?
No, mine sort of stemmed more because I was doing this degree where the majority of people wanted to help athletes kick further and run faster. And I thought, actually, these are really cool technologies and skills and information that we're learning. Can we apply that to something a bit cooler? No offense to the athletes out there. But I definitely took a different pathway to my peers at university. But I was always interested in working with kids my whole life. I've always seemed to end up chatting to and playing with every kids at the, at the barbecues. I have always had fun with working with children. So that's more where I ended up that way.
And who has sort of inspired you in your work? Is it the people who are teaching you, or the people that you're, the patients that you're working with?
I think initially, definitely, I never really realised that I'd met anyone with cerebral palsy. I had, but I didn't realise. it was my teachers at the time, my lecturers, but and as I continue on through my career, it's the people who I work with, but it's the people who I work for as well. So that's the people with cerebral palsy and their families. And yeah, we're very fortunate to have good engagement with people who have lived experience, and that's who is really at the center of why we're doing what we're doing. You need to be able to do meaningful research that's impactful for them. So if you're not inspired and engaged with the people who are at the center, then it's really hard to find that mark. So.
And how do you provide feedback to people that are involved in your research?
A few different ways. I give actual reports right back to the family or the child if they're old enough. And Jane mentioned before that she talks to the families in one of our particular studies. But we also, for example, in New Zealand, there's a fantastic, the Cerebral Palsy Society of New Zealand, and they're a society that are for people with CP and their families. So we're fortunate to be able to report back to them and feed back to families through those kind of forums. And also at a lot of the conferences now have that family involvement as well. And so you can actually it's not just about publishing a paper anymore, it's actually about, okay, what else are you doing to report back on these findings to the people? So it's directly to the participants, and then it's to a higher community level, and then it's can go even higher than that now with everyone being so tech savvy on Zoom now. So that's my experience. But yeah.
Nika, what are some of the things that, oh, Jane, I can see you've got something to say.
I was just going to invite Nika to talk about her findings, about how to feed back, because Nika did a study that we then translated into the next, reporting back to families at the next study. Do you want to talk about that, Nika?
Yeah, sure. It turns out research participants love being involved in research, and they love learning from their own participation and learning more about what the research findings tell us. And they're really keen on being fed back that information, either through informal reports or through infographics, or yeah, to really be kept in the loop all the time. They feel appreciated. Yeah.
And what Nika isn't saying, as a result of that, learning that from them, she then developed with a student a cartoon of the findings of our next study that we were sending back. So we sent back to the families in the next study, we sent back a written report, but also a cartoon that the children who were taking part could use and understand. And they really, really liked that. So it was a fantastic opportunity to apply what we'd learnt into feeding back to the families the next study.
That's really fascinating, actually, that you're working out ways to communicate with some of the younger participants. How about some of the difficult information that you have to feed back to families? What does that involve?
Yeah, sometimes you do have difficult things to talk to families about. A not uncommon example, which we're coming across at the moment, is if you do MRIs of people's brains, you sometimes find things that they wouldn't have known about. And occasionally that can be risky information. It can be information that families wouldn't otherwise have that's quite distressing. You might find an abnormality, you might find something that's going to affect the child in the future. And it's always really challenging to talk to families about that. They clearly need to know. That's the first question. You know, do you tell them about something? Well, of course you tell them. It's their brain, it's their participation. But there's two things I think that are really important there. One is we can help them both understand what that means and what needs to happen next if there's further steps to be taken. Make sure that they get the right advice and the right expertise. The other is many of them are really glad to know. You know, I wouldn't have known if I hadn't been part of the study that this was going to happen, or that this was going to be a problem, or that we needed further tests or whatever. So it's often difficult, it's challenging for us as the team, it's challenging for participants, but usually the feedback is very positive. Usually they are glad to have been part of it and glad to know. Information in the end is power. So I find that very helpful.
Yeah, I guess there's a lot of regulations and everything in the hospitals about how to manage that information, and it must be really challenging at times. But I'd like to hear a little bit more about your research goals for the future. I think some of our audience are quite interested to hear more about what you're actually doing, what's exciting, what is potentially going to improve quality of life for children at the moment. So I'm going to go around each of you and ask you to give us sort of a specific example of something that might improve someone's quality of life that you're working on at the moment or have worked on. So I'll start with you, Sian.
Okay, so I'm just running through which one. One is very exciting because we've just got ethical approval for it in the last week or so, is the PEPIARC study, which is a study, it stands for sort of partnering early with children and whānau for the early diagnosis of cerebral palsy. And so it's a feasibility study that we're looking to run out of Wellington for an early diagnosis sort of clinic or a hub of cerebral palsy. So recently there's been some best practice recommendations have come out around which particular diagnostic or assessment tools that are very highly predictive of cerebral palsy. One I've already mentioned is the general movements assessment. And whilst we won't be able to get every single baby in New Zealand, it won't be feasible for every single baby in New Zealand to have all of these assessments, and it's not, you know, wouldn't be worthwhile to do that. What we want to see is that if we are able to select particular babies who have particular indications, to actually have those assessments done at the right time, will we be able to lower the average age of diagnosis in New Zealand from, at the moment it's around 19 months of age, will we be able to lower that to around 3 to 6 months of age? And with that will come that information, that clarity, we hope, for families of what is happening with their child, and maybe opportunities to provide support for these families at this really challenging time. Maybe make it less scary, maybe stop them from Googling things that may not be quite correct for their particular child and their situation. And then obviously there's that all important opportunity for perhaps early intervention, which is really what we're looking to get to, is that earlier diagnosis means potentially pathways for earlier intervention, which will jump on that time of peak neuroplasticity, so that we can maybe have a better motor outcomes and other outcomes for the child and their family as well. So that's a really exciting study that's on the back of my head at the moment, because we've just got the ethics approval, and we've got an amazing team working behind the scenes trying to get all the rest of the paperwork up and running for this hub. Hopefully we'll start this year, or in this early half of this year.
That would be an amazing difference, being diagnosed almost a year or more, year and a half earlier even. That would make a big difference to outcomes. How do people get involved in these type of studies?
Well, this is just a start-off project, so we're hoping that it'll be open to babies who are born in a particular pathway within the Wellington region, and they will be automatically sort of flagged as qualifying for our study, and then we will invite them to take part in the hub itself. But in the future, we hope that something like this could be rolled out more widely across the country if it works, if it's deemed to be something that the families want and the clinicians want as well. But there's lots of exciting opportunities to come for this sort of space, because we're learning a lot as we go.
And how about you, Nika? Can you share with us something really exciting about your research that's happening at the moment?
Well, in the past, I've been involved in a randomized controlled trial that investigated whether like an intervention for preschoolers to improve preschoolers' self-control, so their executive functioning skills, was effective in a preschool setting, so at a early childhood education setting, and helping children improve their self-control, so being able to wait your turn, being able to raise your hand before speaking, and those kinds of skills are predictive of later success in school and even later happiness in life when children grow up to be 20 and 30. And helping children to be ready for school, I think that's something that we can all work on. Also in New Zealand, there's a before school check, which is a wonderful initiative to make sure that children are indeed ready for school. And I think we could add to that screening program by offering interventions, for example, to address those difficulties that we might have picked up with that screening. So I think I'd love to be, I'm still planning on addressing that, because it's a huge issue, and we have to start little and make little steps to be able to address a bigger problem. So yeah, that's my future plan at the moment, which I'm really excited about.
So you're working on getting the outcomes implemented into the normal before school processes that everyone finds out about?
Not directly, but it made me realize that we need to do more to be able to make sure that all children in New Zealand are ready for school, and all children have the opportunity to reach their own potential. So yeah.
Yeah, that sounds really fascinating and very different to what Sian's doing as well. Jane, what are some of the exciting things that you or members of your team are working on at the moment that you can highlight?
Well, we've got a couple of studies at the moment. So we're particularly interested in interventions around the time of birth that might make a difference in the long term. And one of those trials has been would providing very preterm babies, these are the tiniest, extremely preterm babies, would providing them with some extra protein in the first few days help enhance their growth, and particularly their brain growth. There's been a lot of argument about how much protein do very tiny babies really need? Is more better or not? And the only way you can really find out is to do a randomized trial. But of course, it's all very well to do the intervention when they're a baby, but to know if it makes a difference to them, you have to wait till they've grown up. So we're currently assessing those children at school. So they've got to school age now, and we're looking to find out whether they're actually doing better at school as a result of that intervention in the first few days of after birth. And the other trial asking similar questions is babies at risk of low blood sugar levels. Could giving sugar gel, treating them as a preventative an hour after birth, could we give them some sugar gel? Would that help prevent low blood sugar levels? Why is that important? Because low blood sugar is associated with brain injury. So if we prevented the low blood sugars, could we improve outcomes? And again, you have to wait until they're grown up to find that out. So we're assessing those children at school age now too. So we hope in the next couple of years we'll have answers to both of those questions. Does it make a difference to how children are doing at school? And that's pretty exciting.
That sounds really interesting. And I know a lot of people have been following your research over the years about the sugar gel. So how do people get involved in these studies? It must be quite challenging to get parents of newborns to want to give their newborn anything experimental.
Well, normally we would try and provide opportunities for families to take part, obviously long before the baby's born. So when they've got time to think about it, antenatal clinics, talking to their midwives. As far as the sugar gel is concerned, we're talking to families whose babies are known to be at risk of having low blood sugars. They're going to have blood tests to test for their low blood sugars. And we know that the sugar gel is safe and effective to treat low sugar levels. So this is an opportunity, you know, to see if it would help prevent low sugar levels. So families who've had babies with low sugar levels before and know about the risks are often very pleased to have the opportunity to possibly have something that might help. We don't know if it will help. That's why we're doing the trial, but at least there's an opportunity. Most families take part in research because they want to help other families in similar difficulties. I found it really hard to watch my baby have blood tests for low blood sugars, so I'd really like to take part in the study to help future families avoid that if they can. It's that kind of thinking that is the most common reason for families taking part.
I can understand when you work with families like that, how it must be just amazing and feel like such a privilege to work with them when they do have that attitude of really wanting to help others as well.
Absolutely, and none of it would happen without the families who want to take part.
We're going to start working through some more of the questions. I invite the audience to submit questions and we'll see how many we can get through tonight. We've got only probably a few minutes left, but if there's lots of questions, I might ask our speakers if they've got a few extra minutes. Jane, what are some of the international initiatives you're working on with researchers overseas at the moment?
Well, the one that's probably most active at the moment, we've mentioned briefly, to do with MRIs in very preterm babies. And we're working with a team in Canada, particularly with that. And one of our research fellows is based in Ireland. So that's a pretty international team working on that problem, understanding what the MRIs are showing us. And we're doing the MRIs here, but the clever processing and complexities, turning those images into meaningful outcomes is being done partly overseas. And then the follow-up, what does this mean? How are these children doing at school? We do back here.
And how on earth do they keep a baby still in an MRI machine?
You feed them and wrap them up tight and tell them to go to sleep.
Oh, very interesting. Sian, are you involved in any international collaborations at the moment?
If Australia counts, then yes. One is we're running as a site in New Zealand for a multi-site trial. That is the Participate CP project. And they actually reached out to us during COVID. When August, I think it was 14th, was that the day we went into lockdown? That morning they reached out and said, hey, New Zealand's doing really well. We need more participants because we're all in lockdown and really needs another site. What do you think? And we said, yep. And then that afternoon went into lockdown and went, oh, that gave us time to put all of the paperwork together. But so we're working on that collaboration, which is really, really helpful to work with these other teams. And Australia is not so different, but there are some other complexities that we also need to deal with, obviously, with working with the New Zealand population too. Funnily enough, I've worked with a team in Spain on a project because they saw that a survey that we did a few years ago and they wanted to replicate that. So we replicated this same survey that we did for our New Zealand clinicians. We did it in Spain, which I know nothing about and nothing about how they run things and how their services run, but that was a really fun collaboration there and might be opportunities for some more down the track as well. But you've got to be flexible with your time zones and understand the complexities of different cultures and different regions as well. But it's another exciting part of the job.
Yeah, it's fantastic to see that other countries seeing our research and wanting to get involved or wanting us to do a New Zealand arm of a trial. That's yeah, just fantastic to know that we're right up there internationally. Nika, do you have any international collaborations at the moment?
Not at the moment. In the past, I was invited to share study data that I collected as part of my PhD. So that resulted in combining evidence of different trials to be able to make different or stronger predictions on relations between. So the PhD project was on investigating the effect of a positive parenting program on preschool age children's behavior in terms of inattentive and overactive behavior, so children at risk of developing ADHD. So that collaboration was purely online and did not involve many or any in-person meetings, just everything online. So that was quite handy, although it was overall very global, from the United States to the Netherlands to here in New Zealand. So that is difficult to find a good time to have an online meeting.
It must have been really interesting to see how all the different countries approach their preschooling and the way people do things differently.
Absolutely, yeah.
So it's nearly 8 o'clock. So we're going to wrap up with one final question, which I'm going to ask to each of you, which is what would your advice be for future female scientists in general neuroscience or the general health sciences? So what advice would you give people who are looking into this area? So I'll start with you, Sian.
I was hoping you wouldn't pick me first. I think just do what you do, find what you like, and as I said before, if you find what you like, you'll do well at it, and then make sure that you really surround yourself with good people, good mentors and coaches actually as well, and that can help you go far and enjoy it.
What's your advice, Nika?
Well, I agree with what John just said, but I think it's also good to not be afraid to ask for help if you need any help. This could be personal, but it could be also in terms of finding a right mentor. Yeah, just go for it.
And what's your advice, Jane?
Yes, I think it's been said, go for it. Follow what you're really interested in. Take the opportunities as they come up. Find great mentors and stay in touch with them. They will be your friends for life.
Do people often find mentors through university lecturers and things like that?
It's often a mixture of teachers and people you come across, seniors, and also, you know, there are some great mentoring programs in many institutions, including our own, where there's a formal mentorship opportunity that can be as formal or informal as you wish. Usually your lifelong mentors are the people you really come to admire and you work with long term. But there are lots of different kinds of mentors. I think Nika's point about don't be afraid for asking for help, and likewise, you know, can I have a coffee? Can we talk about this? Works wonders.
Do you often get students coming up to you just asking if they can work with you? And
yes, but also just, can I chat to you about something? And it's really important that people feel they can do that. That often just talking something through helps. And I think a lot of people are anxious to ask senior people to do that for their time. Oh, everybody's busy, can't ask that. But actually, they're usually very happy to have a coffee and talk about something. So don't be afraid to ask.
that's really fantastic. It's great to hear that all of you are involved with just mentoring people and working alongside people. And we know that it's all a really big team that sits behind all of the research, and just also really grateful that you've all continued during the difficult times of COVID and being stuck in New Zealand when there's some exciting collaborations that you want to be part of overseas. So really grateful for your sharing your time tonight. We've had one last question, which I think I know the answer to, which is how do you administer the sugar gel to babies? And am I right in saying that you rub it on the inside of their cheek?
That's right, just rubbed inside the baby's cheek.
Well, I'm going to let you all go now and enjoy the rest of your evening. I want to say thank you to you all, and thank you all to our audience for joining us tonight. I hope you found this really interesting and informative as much as I have.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Good night all.